Welcome back, everyone. My name is Landon Houle, and I'm an assistant professor of English and creative writing here at Francis Marion University. It's my pleasure tonight to introduce Margaret Wilkerson Sexton. I want to start by reading my favorite passage from A Kind of Freedom. I hope I do it justice. It's scary now. Okay. Jackie sat down on the sofa and stared ahead at the TV screen. She flipped it on. The Price is Right had just started. Someone was betting on a two-seater sofa, a nice leather one Jackie knew she could dress up with pillows and throws from Macy's. But the woman on the show was betting too much, $999, when a sofa that size, nice as it was, wouldn't go for more than $500. Jackie wanted to intercede, cry out, "Don't set your sights too high, girl, it won't hold." But she just sat in silence. If she was listening, she would have heard the sirens building in the distance, then leveling off, meeting their target. But as it was, her mind was as focused as a tide breaking, ready to crash, on what she didn't know. I don't want to give away too much of the novel, but suffice it to say, sometimes a character's goodbye can be the best introduction, the moment when you understand who they really are. So it is with Jackie and Margaret Wilkerson Sexton's A Kind of Freedom. In our fiction writing class, wave class, hi guys, we describe Jackie as frustrating. We spent a good portion of several class periods discussing Jackie's motivations. We carefully parsed her second-guessing, her inability to make her own decisions. We wondered at her tendencies to move through life with, as Margaret writes, her fingers crossed. Our problem was that we wanted more for Jackie because we cared about Jackie. We cared about Jackie like she was our friend, like she was our daughter, our sister, our aunt, our mother. We cared about Jackie because Margaret made us care about Jackie, whether we wanted to or not. Margaret makes us care about all of her characters through those moments when they seem just as scared, as sad, as joyous, as bold, as vulnerable as we are here today. This is what a writer does, and this is what Margaret does. Born and raised in New Orleans, Margaret Wilkerson Sexton studied creative writing at Dartmouth College and law at UC Berkeley. Her debut novel, A Kind of Freedom, was a 2017 National Book Award nominee, a New York Times Notable Book of 2017, and a New York Times Book Review Editor's Choice. Her work has been published in the New York Times Book Review, Oprah.com, Lenny Letter, Massachusetts Review, Gray Sparrow Journal, and other publications. She lives in the Bay Area, California with her family. We're so thrilled that Margaret has literally traveled across the country to be with us today, and we're so glad she's saying hello and not goodbye. Please join me in welcoming Margaret Wilkerson Sexton.
Landon, that was so nice. I'm so grateful for that introduction. You know, I think about when I was writing this book and even the manuscript that came before this book, and what I would have wanted was for readers to identify with the characters in that way and to really feel their humanity and to really be moved by who they were. And so I'm so grateful for that, so grateful to be here in general. And I'm going to read from A Kind of Freedom tonight. The book spans 3 generations of a New Orleans family from World War II to post-Katrina New Orleans. And I'm going to read from all 3 sections tonight, which I've never done, actually, even though, well, you never really get enough time to do that. And so I'm excited to give you pieces from each generation. And the first one I'll read from is Evelyn's, and this is in the 1940s in the Jim Crow South. Oh, and she's just met a man who's not from as polished of a background as she is. Her father's a doctor. She goes to debutante ball. She's had a very sheltered and privileged upbringing, and despite the fact that it's the 40s in the Jim Crow South. And she's met a man who's just not from that sort of family or environment. And so she's invited him to come and meet her father and her mother, and she's a little bit worried about how they'll react. Back home, Evelyn tended to the normal Saturday chores, dusting her bedroom, bleaching the toilets, scrubbing the hardwood with vinegar until it shined. Ruby had sometimes helped her in the past, but since Andrew had come into her life, Ruby's time tending to anything but him was long gone. Once Evelyn finished, she ventured out into the kitchen for a cool glass of lemonade. As she was setting the pitcher back, her mother cornered her between the icebox and the stove. She hunched over so close Evelyn could smell the late afternoon coffee on her breath. "Does Renard like veal?" her mother whispered, picking at the hair that had strayed from her loose bun. Evelyn was relieved by the question's minor nature. "I'm sure. He's not picky, Mother." "Yes, but that's not what I asked you. Does he like it?" Evelyn nodded. "I think I remember him saying he loved the taste of a nice veal," she lied. Mother jerked her head toward her. "Well, I was planning to roast it with some celery and onions and bell peppers, and then I would bake a pan of macaroni and cheese with the long spaghetti noodles and a tomato salad. I don't suppose he would have an issue with that. I would have made fish, but we've been eating it every Friday." Evelyn shook her head. "Whatever you make will be delicious, Mother." It was only when her mother had ushered her out into the dining room and Evelyn was alone with the place settings and the cloth napkins that she wondered what had come over the woman. Evelyn had never seen her doubt herself in the kitchen or otherwise. Mother threw receptions and parties nearly every month of the year, and guests never left without complimenting her gumbo or sweet potato pie, or just the careful way she organized the flowers, linens, and centerpiece just so. Evelyn wondered, too, if Mother had been just as eager to please Andrew, if she had the same conversation with Ruby. Evelyn hadn't heard anything, but if not, why? Why would Mother be more nervous about Renard? A little while later, Ruby burst into the parlor carrying a bunch of tulips. "Is that for dinner?" her mother asked. "No, indeed. They're from Andrew. For me." Ruby held her head high and back. The pink blossoms had started to wilt, but they might as well have been an engagement ring. Well, go get changed and help me in this kitchen," Mother snapped. Ruby took her sweet time anyway and managed to come out only once Evelyn and Mother had completed all the tasks. "What a coincidence, just in time to taste the veal," their mother huffed. "It's perfect," Evelyn said, wiping the gravy from her mouth, piling the compliments on so her mother might relax. "Real good, Mama, a little salty, though," Ruby added. At that, Evelyn pinched her sister. Ruby swiped her back with a wet towel, and their mother smacked them both on the bottoms with the palm of her hand. "What did I do?" Evelyn screamed. "Ruby's the rude one." Mother just glared back, unaccustomed to managing the conflict. It wasn't that Ruby hadn't tried to antagonize Evelyn for years. It was just that Evelyn had always preempted the attacks by catering to her sister's needs before Ruby even knew she had them. If Evelyn sensed Ruby was on the rag, she'd make her a sugar sandwich. If it was a Monday and a boy hadn't asked Ruby out, Evelyn would compliment her on her figure. "Oh, I wish I had your breasts," she might say. "Even brothers are bigger than mine." And Ruby would laugh Evelyn into a net of safety. But since Renard had come along, there had been a great change in Evelyn. Who was Ruby to criticize their mother's cooking when Mother had spent the morning straining her nerves into a jumble? Who was she to waltz in 20 minutes before a dinner party with flowers in her hair? Evelyn was tired of her sister's whims, her privilege, her moods, and her authority in thinking the whole house needed to be privy to them. Their mother just shooed them into their bedroom, and the sisters sat in silence there until the doorbell rang. When Evelyn walked out, her parents were standing at the front door whispering. "Let's not make them wait, Nelson," her mother said, still grim-faced. And even when Renard and Andrew walked in with flowers, Mother didn't adopt her normal state of ease. Evelyn was concerned. She found that with her mother on edge, she couldn't relax either. She fulfilled the expected duties. She ushered her man into the house and introduced him. She set the flowers he brought in a vase on the kitchen counter. She spoke in an educated manner about the riot in Detroit, but the ease she had hoped to feel introducing her new family to her old one escaped her. Renard, on the other hand, soared. When Daddy remarked that Negroes expecting Roosevelt to address the violence against blacks were going to die waiting, Renard agreed, adding that it was educated folk like Thurgood Marshall who were changing things in this country. He remarked with a genuine air that their mother could have been their sister. He ate every morsel of food on his plate and asked for seconds. He raved with Brother about Satchel Paige's 3 scoreless innings at the East-West All-Star game. Evelyn had worried that Renard and Andrew would compete with each other, but neither man took over the table, and instead they yielded it to each other. Renard went on about Andrew's father's intelligence, and Andrew gushed over Renard's work ethic, said that he would surely be a doctor one day, and that anyone who was treated by him would be lucky. Even Ruby praised Evelyn's bread pudding. "I don't like raisins," she said, "and you usually overdo it with them. But the way you plop them so scarce in here, you can barely taste them, Evelyn." After dinner, Evelyn helped her mother with the dishes, and the men snuck off to the parlor for cigars and whiskey. When Evelyn was done, she joined them. Both men were seated on the sofa, Daddy in between them. Andrew was shouting, "Have you read the Courier? All I know is we have a duty to give our all to the war effort, and maybe when we exercise our duty, this country will start to exercise theirs." Daddy scoffed. "Don't hold your breath waiting. Anyway, remember, son, the likelihood is you won't be flying planes or healing the sick over there. You're going to be serving meals, cleaning quarters, digging graves." Andrew shrugged. "Maybe in the beginning." But after a while, when things heat up, they're going to need more of us. And that's when it will all be worth it, when we'll be able to prove ourselves. Prove yourself how? By getting killed? Or better yet, you'll be like that Simmons boy in Treme. Heard of him? The boys shook their heads. Daddy smirked as he spoke. He was a mail clerk in France. Got sent home after he lost his leg. Came back to an opening at the post office down on Loyola. He rode over there and took the test. Thought he was a shoo-in. Veterans were supposed to have first preference after all, and he made the highest mark of anybody. But you think they hired him? Daddy repeated. You think they hired him? Neither boy answered. Finally, Daddy turned to Renard. What do you think about all this, son? He asked, shaking his head. Renard looked at Evelyn before he spoke. He cleared his throat and took a sip of his water. Evelyn whispered a little prayer. Well, I think we're living in a state of hypocrisy bigger than any this country has ever seen, he started. Amen, Daddy shot in, seeming surprised by his own agreement. And something has to be done so that we don't sacrifice our lives just to come back still not quite American. Let's say we are victorious overseas. What's going to come of the next generation of Negroes here? I mean, before I defend this great nation with my life, I'd want to know that we as a people would be guaranteed full citizenship rights upon our return. Exactly. Now, this brother has some sense. I'm going to call you Ernest Wright from now on, set you up out there on Shakespeare Park. Daddy smiled at Renard, but it was Andrew whom he slapped on the thigh. Renard looked up at Evelyn again, this time with gratitude, and she was proud of him. She'd expected half his speech to come out in stammers, and none of it had, and from what she could understand, it was profound. Even her daddy had said so. Still, she couldn't internalize his joy. Her mother's mood alarmed her. Evelyn knew because of Mother's concern over Renard's preferences that she wasn't being malicious. No, she had assessed the situation and determined there was cause for concern somewhere, but Evelyn couldn't locate it, and that was what spooked her worst of all. Evelyn walked Renard out that night, fighting herself to be as happy as he was. Did you hear it when your daddy called me son, he asked. He did, Evelyn, he did. I never heard that word come out like that before. I knew he would like you, Evelyn said. I know. I should have believed you, but I was so nervous. Imagine if he hadn't. You're the most important person to me. I couldn't live if I couldn't have your hand. He kissed her in front of the house the way she'd always wanted, but Evelyn pulled away, feeling someone somewhere was watching her. Once he was gone, she walked back up the porch steps. She could hear her parents arguing from the door. But did you see his shoes? And did you hear what he said about where he lived? 12 brothers and sisters? Can you imagine? For our daughter? And in a house on Amelia Street the size of a shack? He's a low-classman, Josephine, not middle. Middle I could take. I could do something with it, but low. Then her mother's long silence, its heaviness breaking. I thought that was endearing, to tell you the truth. Don't tell me we're up so high we can't reach our hand out to someone below us. It's not that I won't reach my hand out, don't you say that. You know I do more to lift our people than most. The New Orleans Urban League, the Black Savings and Loan Association. You know how many free medical exams I gave out last year alone? Do you? As his voice lifted, her mother's seemed to cower. I'm not saying you don't. I just don't want to waste all our effort. And on what? An unlikely prospect. Think about your daddy. What would he say? He would say to give a young Negro man a chance. She paused. Then, not everybody gave you a warm welcome either, you know. I was a doctor. You were becoming a doctor, just like this boy. He raised his voice now. I was from a good family. You were lucky to end up with me, and I've done well for you and the kids. That's what I believed, too. She seemed to walk over to him then. But I'm just saying, everyone didn't agree with my assessment. Josephine, if I didn't know you better, I'd think you just wanted her out of the house. That you didn't care who she ended up with, as long as she was gone from here. Mother didn't say anything. Or maybe it's more than that. Maybe you don't want to see Evelyn come out with a better match than Ruby. Evelyn heard the scrape of a wood chair against linoleum and her mother's house shoes batting against the floor. You say what you want, Nelson. You know I will. You say what you want, her mother repeated. You think you know everything, but one thing you can't know is how much I love that child. You didn't carry her, nor did you push her out. You're a mighty good provider, but you didn't learn her how to eat with a spoon and tie her shoes and write her first word, and for those reasons alone, you can't know. Her voice broke. My love for her took over when I had her. There's no room for anything else. Evelyn's daddy's sharper heels tapped, then stopped. Well, I love her too, and I won't have her fighting her way through this life. It's already hard enough. I won't make it harder. I can't. I promised myself that. Okay, so that's Evelyn's section, and you could probably glean from that section just what kind of life she's had and how sheltered she's been, and what a shock it would be to bring even someone who's studying to be a doctor into the family, because he's just not privileged in that same way, and he's not groomed in that same way. And so I'm going to jump over to the 80s, and we're gonna move into Evelyn's daughter section. And she's in her 30s, and she has a baby, and she's a working class woman. Despite everything we know about her mother in the Jim Crow South, we now see that her daughter has become working class, and she's married to a man who has an addiction to crack cocaine. And in this moment in the book, Jackie has just gotten into an argument with her sister Sybil over how to handle her husband, who's addicted to crack, coming back into their lives. And this is all theoretical because he hasn't come back yet, but just theoretically they differ on how they would handle it. The closer she got to her apartment, the stronger her anger grew. In the car, other instances of Sybil's audacity sprang up for recognition, examination. Sybil had been the one to tell Jackie Terry was on crack in the first place. It was an absurd accusation. Terry had been valedictorian of St. Augustine and Xavier. Then, with 3 offers in his hand, he'd accepted a job at the VA. He fell right in with his co-workers, the white boys from Brother Martin, who'd all gotten the job through connections. Jackie didn't mind that he went out every other night with them. It was part of acclimating, he'd said, but even if he hadn't said it, Jackie liked her alone time. As many friends as she had, there was something intoxicating about not having to rehearse every word before it left her mouth, revisit them once they drifted out. Then Reagan got elected with his tax cuts and spending bans, and it wasn't long before everybody she knew somebody who was standing in the unemployment line. Right after Thanksgiving, it was the VA's turn, and by Christmas, Terry was out. Jackie didn't think it was a big deal. He'd had so many offers he could just go back to one of the pharmacies he'd rejected. But that's not the way it works, Jackie, Terry had snapped, in a tone that was not of him, not of their relationship. He started staying out every night. Those same friends from work had kept their jobs, and they were schooling Terry in how to get another one, he'd said. Still, she noticed that his lips were cracked when they kissed, that he was never home, and when he was sleeping, that his jeans sagged around the crotch, and that sewage and water board called her to say their bill was 2 months late. She just chalked it up to the new pressure of unemployment, even suggested she try to get work again, but he'd snapped at her then, too. It wasn't until Sybil came over for dinner. Terry had burst in their house all jabber and quick moves, and after he left, Sybil turned to Jackie, said in a pitying tone that she'd seen the same signs in some of her clients. The emaciation, the restlessness. Jackie asked her to leave, threatened to call the cops when she wouldn't budge. Even though she didn't believe Sybil, Jackie confronted Terry when he got home. He cried, told her he had a problem, he wanted help, but didn't know how to get it. He admitted that he started with the friends at work, first pills, then cocaine, and now he was running their savings dry, chasing after crack. She vowed to stay with him. She didn't understand the drug then. He went to rehab in Northwest Louisiana for 2 months, and he came back with a light in his eyes and a calm about him, but it was still a tight market, and nobody was hiring. After the first relapse, her parents urged her to kick him out, but it was impossible to leave the man she had become an adult with, the captain of the football team who had chosen her for reasons she couldn't explain. She waited it out for a few years, tossed between his bouts of renewed sturdiness and his collapses. She was ready to defer to her parents until she found out she was pregnant. She told him, hoping the child would be the motivation he needed, and he was clean for the first few months. Terry came home every night. He was the father she'd always imagined he'd be. Then one day, without warning, he left for coffee she had in her own pot on the counter and didn't come back. With him gone, she didn't think about the hollow ghost who'd occupied her house the last few years, just the way her 16-year-old self would lean into the phone receiver for hours, twiddling the cord around her thumb. The way he'd press his hand into her back and lead her into a room. The way he'd soothe her when someone talked down to her. If they don't see you as you are, that says more about them than you, Jackie Marie. And even now she'd repeat that to herself when she needed strength. But it seemed as though she still couldn't regain her footing. His addiction had blindsided her, and she'd been looking down at the ground while she walked since then, on the verge of falling off a cliff that she wasn't sure existed. She pulled up to Stately Grove, got out the car, lifted the baby. The elevator wasn't working, so she braced herself for the walk. She opened her apartment door, walked inside, shut it, and slumped against it. She could hear her neighbors upstairs fussing already. It started like this around dinner, low-grade rumbling that escalated by bedtime, and last night Jackie had almost called the police until she remembered she was stuck at Stately Grove. The last thing she needed was an indefinite enemy. The man yelling just now carried a gun. She knew because she'd glimpsed it creeping out of his peeling brown belt one morning. And then there was the woman downstairs with the gold jewelry and bright red lipstick whom Jackie had heard might be a lady of the night. Jackie passed by her bedroom window, which she hadn't bothered to drape. Police cars framed the block like trees lined her old neighborhood, like potted plants had guarded the fresh lawns. Maybe she could just run downstairs and report the noise, which was steady building. She'd be upstairs before anyone could see her. Then again, the streets had eyes sometimes. The last thing she needed was somebody retaliating, calling the police on Terry one night. The nightly wail of sirens started as she ran TC's bath water, but she put them out of her mind as she fell into her evening routine, bathing him, toweling him clean, especially the rolls around his neck where milk tended to gather, greasing his belly and legs with Vaseline, plucking a clean onesie from the hamper, then settling him down beside her. She used to fold clothes. Hell, she used to wash dishes and mop floors too, but that was over now. No. She'd nurse him one more time, then they'd sleep until 5. You're blessed, her mama had said one night. You didn't sleep through the night until you were 9 months old. Sybil neither. Jackie appreciated compliments like those, but she didn't need any reminders that her son was an angel. After Terry left, she wouldn't have made it without him. The noise from the couple upstairs picked up, along with music from a boombox outside. Rap music, she guessed. I came in the door, I said it before. I never let the mic magnetize me no more, but it's biting me. Then more fighting. Jackie wondered what the man had done to rile the woman up so. She wanted to go and ask her about it, tell her nobody was worth her dignity, but she reminded herself not to get involved. She'd hoped initially that she was just at Stately Grove temporarily, but she was saving only $500 a month, and Terry was sick as ever. It was starting to look as if she might be walking her son to school from this broken-down parking lot, the sign in its center leaning and chipped. Her daddy had offered to put a down payment on a place in the East. I have more than enough, darling. And he did. He hadn't finished college, but he'd hustled through the rest of his life. His ease had been slow coming. There was a packaged liquor store that went bankrupt, a cleaners that got held up, and years of selling old cars and crooked lots. But Jackie and Sybil always wore winter coats from Maison Blanche, and when Jackie won homecoming queen, her daddy bought her a Lincoln. Still, she refused him. Her whole life she had been dependent on a man. She met Terry in high school and grew up beside him, and it was only after he was gone and the garbage needed to go out and the bills needed to be paid by a certain date that she realized she was only halfway grown, like the little girls she saw downstairs some mornings, mismatched foundation caking their face, half shirts revealing their too taut bellies. Jackie settled the baby on his stomach as her mama had taught her. He'd slept in her bed the last few months. She told her mama it was him, that he didn't get a good night's rest in his crib, but the truth was she'd lay awake all night if her son wasn't beside her, the wail of police sirens winding like a snake inside her brain. Without tying her hair or changing out of her daytime clothes, she turned on the television, switched out the light, prayed her eyes would soon close. There was a special on the news about drugs, and while she faded, she heard snippets. Crisis, hands-on horror, a threat to every suburb in America. She didn't need to open her eyes to know blacks were being handcuffed, carted into cop cars. Funny the way they were describing it, when she'd seen protesters up and down South Claiborne last week crying out, "The war on drugs is a war on us." Jackie didn't know whose side she was on. She was still teetering between her narrow options when she heard the knock. Nobody ever came by unannounced, especially not at this hour, so she stayed where she was. It was probably some residual noise from upstairs. She didn't think the man beat the woman, but she sometimes heard bangs and crashes indicating something had been thrown. Another knock, louder this time. She knelt slowly, felt around in the dark for the baseball bat she kept under her bed, held it up to her shoulder, tiptoed to the door, afraid to breathe for fear the person on the other side would hear her. She still wasn't sure what she would do when she arrived. Just then a man's voice rang out, "It's me, baby." Jackie opened the door, stepped backward, and watched Terry ease into the living room like butter pouring. He was all brown skin and height. There hadn't been many boys in high school who stood taller than Jackie, but he was one of them, even at 14, and her head only reached his shoulder in their wedding photos. "It's me, baby," he repeated, with his fresh fade and shaved face, which was full again, as though he'd been eating. "What are you doing here?" She forced the edge into her voice. It might have been there on his own had he shown up yesterday, but after her talk with Sybil, she'd developed tenderness toward him. He started to explain. "I've been staying by my mama," he said. "I went to rehab again. I guess I hit bottom. I don't even remember," but he shook his head. "There's nothing like a mother's love, let me tell you. I got myself together. I've been out a month. I wanted to come and see you and the baby right away, but Mama held me back, said don't go in there unless you're prepared to stay. So I did. I'm sorry to scare you," he said. "I just got so excited. I went to my meeting and they gave me this." He held out a green chip. I know it's not much. I know 2 months is not that long, but for me, I never thought I would hit a week, so it feels like something. It feels like something. You're the first person I wanted to share the news with. Guess I just got caught up thinking about my own excitement. I can leave if you want. Jackie thought about what Sybil would say. It was what her father had told her to do in high school if she was having trouble deciding whether to accept the drink at a house party or stay out an hour later because the music at a concert had gotten good. And it had been good advice. The answer always came to her so clearly, but it was following it that had been the problem. She didn't answer right away, just sat down. Not asking him to leave seemed to be response enough, and he sat too. Not next to her, but on the opposite sofa, on the only patch not covered by unfolded laundry. She noticed a cereal bowl of dried milk on a television tray in front of him, and she waited for him to say something about the apartment, which looked like Hurricane Betsy had blown through it. Her family had long since started to comment. "Girl, is there a free inch of carpet in this house?" That from her mother, the week Jackie paid a mover to place her bed in her living room. Her fear of intruders seemed to subside the closer she slept to the front door. Or, "You ever thought about hiring a housekeeper?" That from her sister, the week Jackie cooked a pot of gumbo, a whole roast, potato salad, and rice and gravy, but never got around to the dishes. The questions haunted Jackie, even weeks after they'd been asked. Because after everything with Terry, she was still the same woman at heart. The one who, though she nearly always came up short, aimed to please. The one who used to paint her nails and scrub her baseboards and shave and douche her honey pot, and every week she was on a diet, like the one where she ate the same food as everybody else, but dished it out on a saucer instead of a real plate. But he didn't seem to notice. He only turned to her and asked, "Baby asleep?" She nodded. That's good. You need a break." "I'm so tired, Terry," she said, but she hadn't meant to. It was what he called out of her, the truth. When she had been so comfortable covering it for everybody else, her mother, her father, her sister, she had learned to smile first thing when people saw her so they wouldn't have the burden of joining her in her despair. She had learned to stretch her cheeks out for 30 seconds, not that she was counting, to answer their questions according to what they might want to hear, not what she was really thinking. "I'm good," she'd say, but it had to be with the proper lilt, with the last word stretching up so that it tinkled out like a wind chime. The only one she hadn't had to fake with all this time was her baby. It seemed like the soft coos, the warm embraces, and the patience to get up and grab him, even when she'd just gotten to sleep herself, came to her through a sort of grace. But his father was here now, and she was so tired. Terry walked closer, sat down next to her, holding his head down, seeming to know he had caused this pain. He reached out and held her, and for the while that she cried, really sobbed into his chest, she didn't care if Sybil was right, if this was just another temporary lull, and of course it was. She wasn't stupid. She was just glad that he was there now, because she'd needed this release more than she could have known. When she was done, she wasn't embarrassed. She wiped her face with her shirt, and he got up to get some tissues from the bathroom. "Excuse the mess," she said when he returned. "Please, you got enough on your plate to be worrying about housekeeping." She shrugged. "I always kept a good house," she said, sniffling again. "It was what I was known for. Remember? People would come over for some of my gumbo and pound cake. It didn't matter what time of day it was. I always had something to offer them. Biscuits or sweet potato pie, something. Now I'd be embarrassed to let somebody in here, much less serve them something out of that god-awful kitchen." She nodded to the back of her apartment, where she hadn't done dishes in days. The refrigerator was empty, and even if she tried, the cracks between the linoleum would never be free of that grime. He sighed, shook his head, held his hand out. Jackie had small hands, and his were nearly twice her size. Often, they pressed them against each other to marvel at the discrepancy. She had an urge to do that now. "Don't take that on as your fault, baby," he said. "It's me. I know it's all me, but He stopped himself. "I was going to say I'm going to do better, but I won't make any promises. That's what my sponsor always says, that there's another side to promises, like a coin, and it's called disappointment, and well, they tell us just to take one day at a time. One moment, really. Moment by moment, and that's been working for me." Jackie sat with that for a while. She had heard most of his lines 1,000,000 times before, but this one was new. No promises, huh? Moment by moment. That's what she didn't want. Uncertainty. That's what made her feel so out of control, so desperate. She'd do her best to manufacture conviction during times like those. Last time she had sworn to her parents that it was different. She had bragged to her friends that any minute they'd be back in their house on Rosalia Drive, and if not that one, something better. She'd believed herself when she spoke like that. But when she thought about it now, that belief never led anywhere, did it? The baby fussed, and she stood to see about him. She beckoned for Terry to follow her, but when they arrived at the bedroom, TC had already quieted. Jackie collapsed at the head of the bed, her cheek on her pillow. She hadn't made it up that morning, and Terry had to move a twisted sheet to the side to find a clear space on the edge. Jackie closed her eyes, just for a minute. She knew she wouldn't do anything with him tonight. He looked good. She'd had a chance to study him when he walked to the bathroom, and she'd seen the months with his mama had not only fattened him, but reacquainted him with his normal stride, settled his mind so his words came out steady. Still, he had broken her heart too many times for her to manage anything but talk. The last year was off limits for them both, so they traveled backward. High school, for one. Did she remember their first date? When he brought her home 10 minutes after curfew and he'd moved the time back on his car and pretended he thought they were 5 minutes early? She laughed. Of course she remembered. I stayed up all night that night, reliving the date, driving to the daiquiri shop, then stopping at St. Claude's Seafood for crawfish, eating it at the lakefront on top of our car. He joined in. I didn't even brush my teeth or take my makeup off, Jackie went on. It was like I was too high to follow the regimen of the regular world. She regretted that word after she used it, high, but he didn't seem to notice. It was like if I did something ordinary, I'd fall back down. That's right. I sure did take you to the daiquiri shop, he said. I had to pat myself on the back for that one. That was pretty good, right? For a 17-year-old? You in them tight shorts and pink pumps, them rollers in your head? It was all right, she said, smiling though. Not like Commander's for my birthday. She still smiled. Oh, well, yeah, that was later when I got a little dough. Those were the good days, she said. He nodded. Real good. Remember when we took Sybil to Dookie Chase's for the first time, Jackie asked, to stoke the glee of nostalgia. She ordered so much food, and after the waiter left, you asked her, Sybil, were you ordering or reading the menu? They laughed. Sybil had been a broke law student then, and as kids, Mama would cook fancy meals, but they didn't go out much. You should see her now, Terry. She thinks her shit don't stink, walking around in her Brooks Brothers suits. He nodded, shrugged. Yeah, I'm not surprised, I guess. You could see something like that was coming her way. There was a pile of clothes in a basket beside the bed, and he reached down and started folding them, laying them down on the part of the bottom sheet he had smoothed. Think about it. She was always second to you growing up. Imagine what that's like, being the older sister, but people looked past her for you. You have always been a bright light, Jackie Marie. She would have fallen into the compliment. She needed it today more than ever, but the sirens interrupted him, louder than she'd ever heard them, like the police car had pulled right up to her door. Jackie thought she saw Terry's eyes water. She felt a need to comfort him, let him know she didn't blame him for the way things had turned out. You would think I would feel safer knowing they're here all night. She forced herself to chuckle, rolled her eyes. He set the shirt he was folding down and leaned in and squeezed her. She didn't fight him off, but she didn't relax into him either. He seemed to sense her discomfort and eased off, but not before adding, I'm going to get you out of here. She smirked. I thought you said no promises. That's not a promise, that's a fact. He paused, then started again. When I was gone all that time, it wasn't because I didn't love you. I know you know that, but I feel like I got to say it. My love for you, for TC, was the only thing that brought me back. The only thing. Remember that. Okay, so that was Jackie's section, and I'm sure you could tell it read a little differently than the first one. And I'm going to go into TC's section, and this is 2010, so post-Katrina New Orleans. And this is a quick section, but he's just getting out of jail for drug charges, marijuana dealing, and this is Jackie's son. And I've alluded to this, my whole reading, that the family stability and prosperity seem to decline as the generations go on, and that's surprising, right? Because there would seem to be no way to go but up when you start with the Jim Crow South. But the point here, I want it to be unexpected, and the point behind that is to show that despite the fact that we start in such a dire situation, we've had systems like Jim Crow, like mass incarceration, and policies like the war on drugs that are doing the work for Jim Crow, and they just have different names, but they're equally oppressive and stunting. So I'm going to just read this next section. TC, summer 2010. TC didn't remember meeting his father, but the old man's name was Terry Cleveland Lewis. And although TC wasn't quite a junior, his mother believed in saint names and snuck Gabriel in where Cleveland should have been. People had called him TC since he was born. So even now, as he stood 6 feet 7 inches, so tall he had to duck to get in and out of his jail cell, the other inmates yelled, "Watch your head, TC." The COs, of course, called him Lewis. Sometimes he thought that had been the origin of the problem, the fact that he wasn't a real junior. It wasn't that cleaving to his father's legacy might have made a better man of him. From what he'd heard, his old man hadn't worked in years, and even then it was at a half-dead restaurant in the quarter. But it was just another example of his not-quiteness, deficiencies he first noticed when he was asked to repeat kindergarten, and that had culminated in his stay at the Orleans Parish Prison. He was getting out today, though, and maybe that meant something. It wasn't his first time in, but it was hard to count the weekend stint for stealing a bicycle from Bourbon Street. He didn't even mention that incident to his boys. It wasn't enough to earn him any street cred, not that he sold drugs to impress anyone. No. He started smoking his second semester in college after his injury, and he found he could actually afford to buy in bulk by supplying his neighbors and friends. Plus, he wasn't going to lie, there was something soothing about the boys on his block ringing his bell all hours of the day. It hadn't been that way in grade school when it might have counted for something. He'd been a heavyset kid before basketball, and he wet the bed until he was 12. He always passed on sleepovers. TC was not stupid, but he could never forget that for so many years longer than was natural, he couldn't control such a basic function. "You getting out today, huh, Lewis?" The CO was white and short, even for non-Lewis standards, so short he needed to crane his neck to ask TC a question. "He'll be right back in, though," the other CO shot in, black like TC, but full of undrained malice toward him. It happened like that sometimes. The white one laughed. TC joined in, best to stay on their good side. But what the CO had said wasn't true. Not this time. "Nah," TC said, "I got a little man on the way." "So he'll be coming to visit you then?" This from the black one. "Him and his mama." TC shook his head, but he didn't protest. If you had to convince people who you were, it was too late. Isn't that what his grandmama always said? Anyway, he was in a good mood. The girl he'd been seeing before he got locked up had let him call her every night and wrote him letters from time to time. Her name was Natalia, but he called her Bon Bon. She was a hot little thing, and she was waiting for him at her mama's house uptown. They hadn't done much before he left. Low-level dibbling and dabbling that reminded him of his high school days, but she was all he'd been thinking about. And tonight that anticipation would bloom into something he could feel. Thank you.
Just to remind you all, Margaret's book is for sale in the back. You can get her to sign it after our discussion here. Thank you, Margaret.
Thank you.
Just to start questions off, and then I'm going to come to the audience. Can you talk about your title? This is something that came up in our class a lot, and we were sort of thinking about, these different kinds of freedoms, and we're just anxious to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, well, right after I left my job and started writing full time, I was reading All Aunt Haggard's Children, and I was struck by this line, which is one of the epigraphs. "They were the children of once upon a time slaves, born into a kind of freedom, but they had traveled down through the wombs with what all their kind had been born with, the knowledge that God had promised next week to everyone but themselves." And I have to be honest with you. The first book that I've been talking about that was based in the Dominican Republic had the same title, and it never got published. And this title was supposed to be Early in the Morning, and it was the idea that early in the morning you have so much promise and you have so much anticipation regarding the day, and then you get to the end of the day and you're faced with what's really been done. And that's what I feel like I feel that that's symbolic of this book. We have Evelyn at the beginning who wants so much for the descendants behind her, and even if you want to go back further, we have Evelyn's parents who just want so much for the generations that are going to follow. And we know very soon into the book that their hopes are not warranted, and they're going to fall flat. So I thought Early in the Morning really represented that. But my editor could never remember the name of the book. And he would be like, late at night. And it kept happening. And finally we all agreed that the book needed a different title because nobody could remember it. So I was like, I have this other book, A Kind of Freedom. And I really think that would work here very well. And I think it does. I think it works here better than it ever worked with the Dominican Republic book. I think, and just for the reason that that I've been talking about this whole night, like you have all of these promises and expectations related to freedom at the end of Jim Crow, right? You expect that things will get better, and what we see in this book and what we see in society, in many pockets of society, is that they're not getting better to the extent that we hope. And so it's like, are we totally free, or is it just a kind of freedom? So a sort of freedom, and so that's the title. Yeah.
I'll open it up. Well, I'll come. See, he waited too long. Then, and then I'll come to you.
So I'm curious about how it's kind of, since you deal across generations, right, and same place but different times, you sort of created a time machine by articulating different periods and relationships in those periods. And so I was just curious sort of what your strategies were for creating that kind of time machine and how it felt, I guess, and what are some of sort of the real continuities that you wanted to thread through, but then some of the differences that you wanted to have in the world making to sort of give us a different feel for the different times.
Yeah, that's a great question. And very layered. I think, well, the constant is New Orleans. And so that's the backdrop for all of this. And so as the generations progress, you see the city in some ways staying the same, and many things are just repeating. You know, we have Hurricane Betsy that Jackie alludes to, and then we have Hurricane Katrina, and there are just so many examples of this kind of repetition throughout the book. So you have that. But in some ways, New Orleans is like one of the characters, or like one of the generations, right? And it's just like going like this, declining. And so, you know, we have that. But I'll never really know what it's like as a reader to read it and really feel that time warp. Unfortunately, I always think about it like, man, I wish maybe if I had like put it down for 2 years and then gone back to it, I would have really been able to process it like a reader. But because I, you know, intended for it to be that way, I'll never know what that feels like. But it's something I like when I've seen, not quite time, but when I've seen authors manipulate things in that way in other books. It's something I really enjoy, so I wanted to create that. And really a lot of it was just, I wrote the sections separately. So a lot of the ways in which they work together was really just an intuitive placement of it. I didn't put that much effort into how I was gonna position each section. So there were natural breaks, and I would put a section behind it, and I would see that it was like, wow, it was like it flowed into the next section, but it wasn't planned. For most of those interspersed sections, it really wasn't planned in that way, because I wrote them all discreetly, you know. But, you know, I will tell you, the way I wanted to do it was, I have two things that I wanted to do, and my editor said no. And one of them I think she was right about. So I wanted to have it start with TC's section, and then have Jackie's section, and then have Evelyn's section, just in blocks, so not weaving in and out. And I thought that would be, I always wanted it to be, a time warp, so I thought that would be kind of cool, because you're reading Evelyn's section, and she has all this hope, but it's not meaningful hope, right? But the other thing I wanted to do was, I didn't want the reader to know they were related until like 85% of the way through the book, maybe 90. And I thought that would be really cool. But nobody agreed with me about that. But, I was thinking about it earlier today, though. I sort of sometimes think I should have gone with my first instinct on that. But that's okay. There are other books,
It's interesting that we mentioned this word flow and currents, because one of the students, I think this was Jess, noticed water. You want to talk about that?
Oh.
Water as a motif.
Oh, Lord, okay. Yeah. Was that you? Yeah.
Garrett, was that you?
Oh, that's very cool.
Garrett, you want to talk about
I wrote a paper about it.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was interesting that at the end of each of their, when their characters were ending their segments completely for the end of the book, there were references in their final words to water.
Huh.
Evelyn was a little more vague, simply with, as she was being married to Bernard, who was setting a course, uncharted territory. And uncharted territory could be land or ocean or anything. And then with Jackie, there's reference to, what is it? Her, wedding.
Oh,
crashing
yeah.
over her. And then when we get to TC, he talks about soaking in what's happening. And if thinking about it that way, it's kind of like the family set a course with Evelyn.
Yeah.
Somewhere along the line between Hurricane Betsy, quote unquote, there was shipwreck, and then finally the TCE ends up with everything that's come down the pipeline.
Wow.
It wasn't necessarily a question.
I think that's a brilliant topic for a paper. I do. I think that's brilliant.
Well, I have a question kind of on top of that. So we talked about sort of accidental linking. And so was that accidental? We were thinking about it seems so natural because of the hurricanes and
Yeah.
just water sort of everywhere, and that's something the city.
I cannot take credit for it. You know, I want to, but I can't take credit for that. No, I mean, of course you have the storms, but no, I didn't think about all these other nuanced examples. I think that's amazing. And I love that. I love that you saw it. Mm-hmm.
Malcolm?
I don't even know how to follow that. Well, first, Dr. Wu, you did a wonderful job introducing her. We talked a lot about you this semester, and I mean a lot. One of the things I was thinking about, and the rest of these guys kind of thought it was crazy, and you might think I'm crazy too, which is why I'm asking. So when we were reading it, it's like different time periods and there's different personalities.
Yeah.
And while I was reading it, I was thinking that you were changing the way you were formatting it and writing, like the language changed in each one to
Yeah.
look like the person.
Yeah.
Did you actually do that?
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Evelyn, she thinks very formally, and you know, grammar is very intact. This is a very educated woman. Jackie's educated too, but she's also very cool, you know. So she's cool. She knows how to speak the way everybody else is speaking around her. And then TC is in a totally different territory. I mean, TC, I have a cousin, and TC is loosely based on him, and I hung out with him and his friends. I mean, we were very close in general, but in writing this book, I spent a lot of time with him and his friends, and just kind of shadowed them and asked them questions, and I wanted to be up to date on New Orleans slang, and so they helped me with that. And you know, he's in his 20s and he's living his life, and he just helped me really. He helped me to really represent that character in an authentic way. And so, yeah, the language should absolutely be different, and I'm glad that came across.
We're going to follow that up with an idea of psychic distance tomorrow. So
Oh,
put a pin on that.
okay, okay.
We're going to come back to that. Other questions you guys have? Garrett?
So it's also interesting is we are introduced to Evelyn and Ruby's brother as brother,
Yeah.
and then he stays brother throughout
Yeah.
the whole story. So was there a conscious decision to keep him as brother?
No, I mean, I'm thinking, the more I think about it, I might want to do more with his character. I don't know if it would be in a book or in another medium, but he really, I have some ideas about who he is, but he wasn't meant to be a main or a major character. He's named after their father, but you know, he wasn't intended to have so much of a life in this particular book.
You said another medium.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I have my hopes for the book, and I also sometimes think about sequels.
Okay.
Yeah, the more I hear other people talking about it, I'm like, because people ask me so much, is there going to be a sequel? They want to know what's going on with TC. And today I was thinking, I'll see what you guys think about this. I was thinking today, if I did it again, I might do like 3 different sections, and I would do Ruby, Sybil, and TC's girlfriend. What do you think about that? Think about it.
So everyone else has said no to sequels, but it's a possibility.
Oh, I'm thinking about it more and
Okay.
more. I have to wait. I have some other projects that I want to do first, but yeah, I'm thinking about it.
What's interesting about that is the small kind of links in the novel, and then thinking about them then across novels. A lot of
Yeah, and I was thinking Ruby will have a lot to say about her brother. You saw what happened to him at the end. And I mean, it was just a reference in TC's section, so I think Ruby would actually see that section, would actually see that element through, like you would see it unfold. And so that might be interesting. This is just what I'm thinking today. We'll see. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I took a little bit different point of view when we were writing our papers for Dr. Hill's class. From a historical background, I was looking at the, I chose the prompt about looking at setting versus how it interacts with the characters. So I noticed that when we start with Evelyn, the family's here, but the rights are here. When we go back to the
Oh, isn't that interesting?
So
Mhm.
intergenerational like relations, like the family's going downhill, however the
Mhm.
rights went up.
Yeah.
So I was just curious, was that on purpose or?
Well, I want it to look like the rights went up. And they did in many ways. In many ways, the rights did go up. But I want us to look at the ways, the subtle ways, and the less ostensible ways, less obvious ways that the rights really haven't gone up, you know? And so I want it to look like that, but I also want us to be questioning, because obviously something's going on, because if the rights really did go up, I think these characters would have had more of a chance. And so I want us to look at the ways in which, you know, there are other influences here that aren't as obvious, but they're still very significant.
Because the position I kind of drew, like summating the paper, is that, of course, you explained earlier the meaning behind the title. I pretty much gathered that with their given situation, they had a kind of freedom, like trying to make the best of their situation. That's the conclusion I drew to it.
Yeah, I hear that.
So I get what you're saying about, you know, going with the rights and everything.
Okay, yeah, and I hear you, thank you.
I'll ask sort of a follow-up to the different voices. Same sort of thing that I was asking Avery in the last panel. Sometimes writing a dramatic monologue has its own challenges, particularly if you're writing a lot. Are there challenges in writing fiction from the perspective of multiple characters and how you have to shift the voice that you were talking about earlier? Is this putting you as a writer in a different mindset that you noticed as you were writing the different sections?
That's a really good question. I wrote the Evelyn section years before I wrote the next two. It really, I don't know why I felt like I could slip very easily into those characters. It wasn't I've had other projects that I've worked on where I found that I had to, it was very laborious to get the characters to tell me all their secrets, right? Like I felt like it was, you could see my fingerprints all over the page. I didn't really get in there, and I feel like with these characters, I don't know if it's because they were based on people I know, loosely of course, but I was just, it was not a problem to slip in. I just slipped in, and then I didn't have to wonder about specific things. I was just a channel, you know, and people say that all the time, and it sounds, but that's really how I felt that happened. And I continue to feel that with the next project that I'm working on. I feel the same way. I just feel like that's the best place to be in, because then you don't have to, you know, you're not there. You're just really just you're the vehicle for this story being told. And I think it's just more efficient that way.
I think we're about out of time, so thank you, Margaret.
Thank you.